A lot of the AI conversation in publishing right now treats the technology itself as the enemy. Here's the reframe that almost nobody at industry events seems willing to make. AI is a tool, not the threat. A tool can be used well or it can be used badly. It can create enormous value or cause catastrophic harm, all depending entirely on who's holding it and under what terms. AI is simply the latest iteration of a very old story. A new technology arrives, and the question that actually matters is who controls the term of its use. For established authors and thought leaders using a book as a strategic asset, this distinction isn't academic. It's the difference between spending your energy worrying about the wrong thing and spending it on the things that actually determine whether AI helps or hurts your position. In this video, the second of a 4-part series on AI and author rights, I'm going to share with you the 4 things that genuinely matter in the AI versus authors debate. History has a habit of repeating itself. The printing press didn't threaten authors, but it absolutely changed who held the power in publishing. And for centuries, that power sat with printers and publishers, not writers. Before the printing press, written work was scarce and laborious to copy, which gave creators a kind of natural scarcity-based control. The press removed that scarcity almost overnight, and the people who owned the presses, not the people who wrote the words, ended up holding most of the leverage for the next several hundred years. The internet followed a similar arc with music. Digital distribution didn't threaten musicians in the sense that people stopped wanting music. If anything, the demand exploded. But the technology arrived faster than the business models that should have governed it. And for years, artists watched their work circulate freely, while platforms and intermediaries captured most of the value. It took until streaming royalty structures matured, and until artists, labels, and platforms fought through years of disputes over rates, rights, and attribution, for musicians to finally claw back any meaningful share of the value that their work generated. In both cases, the technology wasn't the problem. The terms under which it operated were, and those terms took years, sometimes decades, to catch up with the technology itself. AI is following the exact same pattern. The tools have arrived faster than the contracts, licensing norms, and legal frameworks that should govern their use. The authors who recognize this early, who treat this as a get my house in order before the rules catch up moment, rather than let's wait and see, will be far better positioned than those who don't. The first thing that matters is ownership. Who legally owns the work in question, and can that be proven? Now, this sounds like a basic question, but for a huge number of authors, the honest answer is, I'm not really sure. Contracts get signed, agreements get layered on top of each other, and ownership becomes murky over time, long before AI ever enters the picture. This is especially common for authors who have worked with ghostwriters or co-authors, publishers, or agencies over the years. Each of those relationships typically comes with its own agreement, and each agreement may say something slightly different about who owns the final work, who owns earlier drafts, who owns any research or frameworks developed along the way, and what happens to derivative works. Layer 2 or 3 of these arrangements on top of each other across an entire career, and it's entirely possible to end up in a position where you believe that you own your book outright, but a contract from several years ago suddenly says otherwise, or says something ambiguous enough that would take a solicitor to untangle it all. The practical test is really simple. If someone asked you today to produce documentation proving you own the rights to your book, including any audio, translation, or derivative rights, could you produce that within an afternoon? If the answer is probably, but I'd need to do a bit of digging, that's worth resolving now, while it's a tidying exercise as opposed to a crisis. The second thing that matters is control. Who decides where, how, and by whom that work can be used? This is about more than legal ownership. It's about practical control. If your content lives on platforms, in publisher catalogs, or inside agreements you signed years ago, you may legally own the work, but have very little say over how it's actually used. Consider a common scenario. An author owns the copyright to their book outright, but the book was published through a third party whose distribution agreement grants them broad rights to syndicate, anthologize, translate, or license excerpts to other parties, including potentially to companies building datasets or AI products. Now, the author technically owns the work, but in practice, decisions about where chunks of that work end up are being made by someone else, under terms the author may not have read closely at the time, or may not have anticipated applying due to a use case that didn't even exist when the contract was signed. Control also extends to your own digital footprint, your website, your articles, your social media content, any excerpts or summaries that you yourself have published. All of this is part of your broader body of work, and all of it is subject to the same question. If someone wanted to use it, repackage it, or feed it into something else, do you have any say in that? Would you even know if it happened? The third thing that matters is licensing. Under what terms, for what compensation, and for how long? Licensing is where ownership and control translate into real-world value, or get quietly given away. License is simply permission to use something, granted on specific terms. The problem is that specific terms often weren't very specific at all, particularly in contracts written before anybody was thinking about AI. Phrases like, "and any other formats or technologies now known or hereafter devised," were once standard boilerplate, included to future-proof agreements against things like ebooks and audiobooks. Now, at the time, nobody writing or signing those clauses were thinking about large language models, but the wording is often broad enough to cover exactly that. Now, this matters because licensing terms determine three things: whether you get paid when your work is used in a new way, whether that use requires your consent, and for how long any of this remains in effect. A license granted decades ago with a vague future technology language and no expiry date could still be operative today, governing how your work can be used in context that didn't even exist when you signed the contract. Vague or overly broad licensing terms have been sitting in publishing contracts for years, largely unnoticed because they rarely came up in practice. AI has simply made the consequences of those terms more visible and far more relevant. So why does all of this matter now? These three things, ownership, control, and licensing, have always mattered. AI hasn't created them as issues. It's just made them impossible to ignore. For authors and thought leaders serious about using their book as a long-term business asset, the task isn't to fear AI or to fight it. It's to get clear on these three fundamentals because they determine whether AI becomes leverage for you or a risk that you just didn't see coming. This isn't about panicking about AI. It's about positioning. The authors who come out ahead won't be the ones who shouted about AI the loudest. They'll be the ones who understood early on exactly what they owned and exactly what that ownership was worth. Next week, I'll be digging a little deeper into the risks an author contract now poses in the age of AI. So be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to get notified when that video drops. But until then, happy publishing.